So welcome everyone. My name is Mary Hosbrough and I'm one of the facilitators for our I-CBT Fridays learning groups. And today we are going to be learning about Thoughtthought Fusion. I'm really excited about learning more about this. And Katie Marrotte is going to present for us. So she's an LCSW with lived experience from Connecticut and co-founder of the Lived Experience Collective. So I will drop a link for the Lived Experience Collective in the chat if anyone wants to check that out. And welcome, Katie.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to drop in the chat also a link to my source for the day, which is a paper called Seeing Bears That Are White Near. Oh my God, Seeing Bears That Are Not There, Inference Processes in Obsessions by Karen O'Connor and Fred Ardema. So that is there for you guys to check out if you would like to take a look. We are going to get hydrated today. We're going to play a little bit of a water drinking game. So every time I say the word thought, you're going to take a sip of water, and we're all going to leave this meeting very, very hydrated, because you're going to hear me say the word thought more than I've ever said the word thought in my entire life in 1 hour. I don't know, maybe I will send a box of jelly beans to whoever can count how many times I say thought in this presentation. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
And I'm going to pause and just ask everyone, if you are not Katie and you are not asking a question, go ahead and mute yourself, please.
Perfect.
Is there an option are you able to mute, Mary?
I can mute everyone, but then Katie will need to unmute herself. I will go ahead and do that. And then Katie, unmute yourself.
Okay, did that work?
Yes.
Excellent. Very good. Here we go. Here we go. Slideshow time. All right. We're going to be talking about Thought Fusion today, which is very meta. We are going to be thinking about thoughts about thoughts. So here we go. Starting with this famous quote, I'm sure that we've all heard it. I think, therefore I am, right? We've all heard this quote, right? Here's a quote from OCD. I think I could think, therefore I might be. Uh-oh, I really need to figure this out right now. Quote from OCD, all the time, always. So I want to go over a couple of definitions, just in case you guys are new to I-CBT, or if this is your first meeting, or maybe we need a refresher. First, the definition of inference is just a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. This is an issue in OCD because the reasoning is flawed, right? So we reach a flawed conclusion based on faulty reasoning. Inferential confusion is confusing reality with the imagination and then treating the imagination as if it's real. We also have fusion, which we'll be talking a little bit about, which is just attaching thoughts to various objects, events, other thoughts. And then, of course, we have obsessions, which in I-CBT is just a doubt about an external or internal state of affairs. And you'll notice that I've bolded the word internal. So we're going to be working with a lot of internal obsessions today. Repugnant obsessions, you can call it pure O if you like. This is not doubt about something that's happening outside of our body, but rather something that's happening within our mind. We've got some different fusions that are common in OCD. We have thought-action fusion, which is the idea that having a thought is equivalent to doing an action. We have thought-object fusion, where thoughts can contaminate objects. Maybe I wear a sweater on the day that my grandfather dies, and now the sweater to me is contaminated, right? We also have thought event fusion, where having a thought can cause something to happen. Maybe I have a thought about the devil, and maybe I start panicking that, oh my God, that's going to, it's gonna make the devil manifest, right? Here he is. We also have, and this is unique to I-CBT, thought fusion. Are you ready to get meta? So it's the idea that imagining having a thought carries the same weight to it as actually having a thought. So we're getting confused between imagined thoughts and real thoughts, which we'll go over in just a second. Here's the schematic model from the paper, Seeing White Bears That Are Not There. So we have a trigger. We encounter a trigger. Maybe this is a taboo. Maybe this is a pedophilia obsession. We encounter a trigger, and that could be, of course, they're idiosyncratic, any number of things. Let's say somebody is walking through the grocery store, they see a child. They go, I could have a thought that I want to hurt a child. And then they go, oh my God, I've just had a thought about hurting a child. So there's the two thoughts. We have the thought that you could have the thought, and the thought that you have the thought, creating at the bottom thought fusion. And then flowing from that is the whole obsessive sequence, the story, the consequence, the anxiety, and then the compulsion. So we have a couple compulsions over here: avoidance, appraisal, and neutralizing. So what in the world does Katie mean when she says a real thought versus an imagined thought? So a real thought is any thought that you might have going through your daily life that maybe isn't experienced as intrusive, like I would like a salad for lunch. Oh, look, my chickens are playing outside right now. Isn't that cute, right? So this is a thought that I am actually having. I am having this thought. Sometimes that implies motivation and intent. There's no inferential confusion here, and it's experienced as ego-syntonic. It doesn't set off any alarms when I have a thought about what am I going to have for lunch, because I have no obsessions about that thing. It's just like, well, maybe I'll have a soup, maybe I'll have salad, maybe I'll pull something out of the freezer, whatever, right? The difference here is, and going back to my previous example about pedophilia OCD, now, if I have a real thought that I want to hurt a child, or I want to touch a child, that would be experienced to me, if I actually was a pedophile, as an ego-syntonic thought. That's what I want to do. Attached to this, there's motivation and intent. Whereas an imagined thought in OCD is, well, I could have a thought about X, Y, or Z. It lacks motivation and intent. This is a thought about a thought. I could have a thought, right? It's a statement of possibility. I could have a thought, sure, of course, right? Which I would then confuse for a real thought. These imagined thoughts feels as if it requires action to maybe neutralize it, make it go away, appraise it, avoid it, argue with it, dispute it, whatever, right? So there's the difference here is I might have a thought about wanting to touch a child. I encounter a kid in the grocery store and my brain goes, I might have a thought about wanting to hurt that kid. Oh my God. And that's experienced that could be experienced as intrusive to me. Yikes, right? So a little difference here between the idea of, an appraisal-based model when we're thinking about intrusions is, hey, intrusions are random. They happen to everybody. Do more exposure, sit with it mindfully, or deal with the uncertainty about whether or not this is true about you. I-CBT says the call's coming from inside the house. You're not actually having a real thought about this. You're imagining that you could have a thought about this. You're confusing that with a real thought. That's where the inferential confusion comes in. And we can treat this the same as any other obsession. This isn't something that you need to give your attention to. So here's where it comes to my story. For a very long time, I struggled with thought fusion about my own sexuality. And this was an incredibly loud and an incredibly distressing theme for me before I knew I had OCD. I'm approaching my mid-30s now. I didn't get a proper diagnosis of OCD until I was 30. This theme started in my teens, right? So maybe I would, so we call it, sexual orientation OCD. I had massive doubts about my sexual orientation. So here's some photos of me and my partner in front of Stephen King's house on our wedding day, and just goofing off in front of our garage. Now you might be asking yourself, Katie, did you actually take this presentation on so that you could brag about how cute you are together? And the answer is 20% yes, 80% no. I really did want to educate people on what this is. Okay, so I'm struggling with this theme, right? I'm struggling with my sexual orientation. Am I a lesbian? Am I not a lesbian? And that caused some tremendous problems within our relationship. One of which was, am I going to get married? So here I am. We're eloping to Iceland right after I get my master's degree. I've got my dress, I've got my bouquet. We rented the camper van. We're on our way to the pagan ceremony that we're having in the middle of the woods. Oh my God, it's the dream, right? So here I am smiling. I'm happy, right? No, I'm screaming internally because I'm still roiling with this guilt and I'm sick to my stomach because I'm thinking, if I'm having doubts about my sexuality, why am I marrying a man? And am I trapping my husband to be into years of loveless marriage? Because this is something I have not been able to figure out despite all of the effort that I have put into trying to answer this question, what if I'm secretly a lesbian? Yikes, right? So you can imagine the guilt and shame. So here we go, right? Maybe I encounter a trigger, I'm watching TV, maybe who's an attractive woman? Salma Hayek is on TV. And I go, oh, she's so beautiful. And then I go, I could have a thought that I'm a lesbian. Oh no, right? Because this is my vulnerable self theme. I'm afraid I could secretly be a lesbian. First of all, I'm on the lookout for these thoughts, right? This is a very well-rehearsed thought. This is a thought that I've been having for years and years and years and years and years. And it's something that I've been struggling with. And it's really become quite a habit for me to create these thoughts by trying not to have them, checking for these thoughts and imagining that I'm having these thoughts. So I have this thought of, hey, you could have a thought that you're a lesbian right now. And I go, oh no. Yep, here we go. Another pop-up warning. That means you are a lesbian. Hey, you just had a thought that you're a lesbian, therefore you're a lesbian. Whoa, oh my God, that's news to me because I thought that I was straight, right? Yikes. So we can see there's inferential confusion here. I am perceiving the possibility of having a thought and conflating it with actually having a thought with motivation and intent. And I'm experiencing that as ego dystonic because this is not the truth about me. Here's the inferential confusion. And it is, what if I'm actually a lesbian? And then I have to divorce my husband. My entire identity would change and I cannot let this come true, right? Here's the feared self. What do I do to prevent this from coming true? To keep this feared spectral, big gay version of myself from manifesting in reality? Well, of course I have to do some kind of compulsion, right? And that was avoidance, checking for groinal responses, neutralizing the thought, arguing with the thought, looking for evidence to the contrary and scanning through, well, I had a boyfriend and then I had, but I used to get really excited when my female coworker would come in. So there's evidence to the, and it really was this dizzying, exhausting process to try and prevent this person from coming to fruition. And I started to get some really bizarre obsessions about this thing where it got to the point where I almost didn't want to watch TV anymore because I was sitting and watching TV and having these imaginary thoughts. I would imagine the possibility of having a thought, right? My mind rightly assesses that the thought is alien and absurd. So it goes, hey, boss, this is pretty weird. You might want to check this out because this doesn't feel quite right. Right? So I'm experiencing it as intrusive and ego dystonic. At the same time, I'm bracing against this thought. I'm trying really hard not to have it, which by the ironic process, just, yeah, okay, thought suppression doesn't work. We know that. So I confuse that this thought was a real thought. And then I tell myself a story and then I do a compulsion. So like I said, it started to get very bizarre. And so I'm sitting and I'm watching TV and I'm thinking like, oh my God, what if my sight lingers too long on this person, on this female presenting person on TV? And because I did that, that means that I am a lesbian. So if somebody, who's female presenting came on the TV, I would look away. Or I would think, Well, they have, and I'm going deeper, right? I'm going deeper into the bubble by trying to figure this out. And I'm really grappling with this and trying my hardest to really solve this problem because, oh my God, I have a wedding coming up. Of course, I want to figure this out before I get married, right? So some other bizarre things that would come up is, what if there were other people here watching me and they saw my eyes linger on this person for too long? Would they think that I'm a lesbian? Oh no, therefore I must be a lesbian, right? So there was quite a lot of these different storylines that were playing up throughout, the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years before I got into recovery. And of course, every single time I had this obsession, it just seemed to add more credibility, because after all, why would I be having these thoughts if I were straight, right? So again, another piece of quote unquote evidence that's taken out of context to add this veil of credibility to the obsession. So here's my feared self. I could become a lesbian, and the compulsions are avoidance. I start avoiding LGBTQ literature, film, and people, my friends, right? I start avoiding them because there's this superstition that it could be catching, right? I could catch the gay if I get too close to you. Oh my God. I'm checking for arousal. And by checking for arousal, I'm creating arousal, which is, again, reinforcing this cycle. I'm ruminating. Oh my God, if I could have a trophy of anything, champion ruminator. I am the queen of ruminating, I swear. And testing behaviors. Right? So maybe I'm and it seems like an exposure, but it's not, because the idea is here, I am testing to see if the doubt is true, right? I am not putting myself in a situation to get anxious on purpose. So it might look very similar on the outside, but it is about the intention. My intent was to disprove and check, not to make myself anxious on purpose. So I started engaging in compulsive sex with my husband to check and make sure that I am as straight as I think I am, right? I'm maybe spending more time with female colleagues, and while I'm spending time with them, I'm checking myself. So I'm engaging in all of these testing behaviors to see if my feared self is who I actually am. And of course, I never come to a conclusion because I'm trying to apply a real life solution to an imaginary problem. It's getting me nowhere. So all this does is pull me further and further into the bubble and wrap me farther into the inferential confusion. Here's the story. I could secretly be a lesbian. People can figure out their sexuality later in life, an abstract fact, right? This is module 2. We're looking at the logic behind that's sustaining the story. One time, my female coworker came in and I was really happy to see her. Yeah, dummy, because she was your friend, right? So personal experience, again, another fact taken out of context. Sometimes when I have weird thoughts, intrusive thoughts about being a lesbian, I feel a sensation down there, non-concordant arousal, right? Personal experience. One of my friends didn't figure out that he was gay until he was already in his 20s, which is hearsay. This is somebody else's experience. And of course, OCD's favorite food, it's possible. It's possible that I am a lesbian. Is it possible? Yes. And that's enough for this to become a very sticky thing. So I wanted to kind of go back to something that I had said about the difference between real arousal and a groinal response. So real arousal can imply or not imply desire. Real arousal can happen absence of a trigger. It can just be maybe your blood flow's diverted, whatever. You don't necessarily have to have a desire to do something in order to become aroused. You don't need to check for it. It's either there or it's not there. And it can happen for any reason or no reason. And then we have a groinal response, which for me was created by checking for, trying to stop it, or just the rehearsal of having it in response to this thought. It was almost like a conditioned response. Every time I have an intrusive thought that I could be gay, I have a groinal response and I go, oh no, it's more evidence. It lacks motivation and intent. It's often confused for real arousal, and it feels as though it requires prevention, scrutiny, etc., right? It's not real arousal. It is your body's response to some kind of stimulus, whether it is, and usually, in OCD, it's imaginary. This is a response to an imaginary stimulus. I've had, and with all taboo obsessions, for me, I had tremendous guilt and shame about this because this isn't me. I can't figure this out. I know I'm not a lesbian, but I'm grappling with this doubt. And I'm asking myself, why does this feel so wrong? And if it's wrong, why do I keep thinking about it? Why would I even care about being a lesbian? I have supportive friends and family. I live in a very liberal state. Nobody, outside of some homophobes, nobody really cares if you're gay or not. And then I started asking myself, well, if I care that I would be a lesbian, does that mean I'm homophobic? That's not me either. I don't think I'm homophobic. And of course, now I'm grappling with, well, oh my God, what does this mean about me, right? It starts challenging my idea of my identity. And of course, if I'm a lesbian, it's really unfair to be in a relationship with my partner. So I'm starting to think I shouldn't get married. That's so unfair to him. And on top of that, I'm a terrible person for stringing him along for the last several years. So motivating out of the guilt and shame is more compulsions. I really need to figure this out. I need an answer. I need to put this doubt to bed. And this has been one of my more, shameful and taboo themes that I don't really talk about very much. I think this is probably the first time, maybe some of you, my colleagues, even though I'm very, I tend to be very open about my OCD, and even some of my friends who also have OCD might, this might be the first time they're hearing about my sexual orientation OCD, even though this was the loudest, most distressing theme that I had for a very long time. This was actually the theme that got me into recovery. So I'll tell you a story. My husband and I had just gotten into a spat. It's 2020. Who is not fighting with their spouse? We're both working from home. We're stressed. I had just started my private practice, so I was frankly broke as hell. So we have pandemic stress. We have financial stress. We had just moved into a new house, and I believe at that time he had also lost his job. So we are under tremendous pressure, and we're bickering and we're fighting and we're at each other's throats, right? So I'm laying on the couch and I start ruminating. My favorite. Oh my God, I love ruminating. It's so great. Just kidding. So I'm laying there, I'm ruminating, and I'm like, why am I fighting with my husband so much? And of course the OCD comes in and goes, well, it's probably because you're gay, right? And so I'm laying there and I'm ruminating for about, I would say, an hour. And then I start to panic because I'm really grappling with all the consequences of, oh my God, we've been married. I'm gay, right? Oh my God, I'm gay. And so I panic, and I don't know I have OCD at this time. And so I call my therapist and I'm like shaking. And I'm like, I need a session right now. I don't care what it costs. Call me, right? And she says, all right, 5 o'clock tonight, we'll get on Doxy and we'll talk about it. And I'm talking to her and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going, Erica, I think I'm gay. And she goes, well, why is that so upsetting to you? And I'm like, I don't know. I wouldn't care. And she goes, well, if this was a real realization, I don't think you would be having such a hard time with this. I really don't. I've worked with other people before, and it's not this, now I know the word, it's not this ego dystotic realization that's causing you panic. And I mean, I'm physically ill at this point. Like I'm vomiting, like I'm so sick, and I'm panicked that this is the truth. Oh my God. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, okay, yep, you're right. Of course, that alleviates the doubt. And then after I get off the call with her, I start Googling, why am I constantly doubting my sexuality? And the first thing that comes up is, are you constantly doubting your sexuality? You may have gay OCD. And I clicked, I'm pretty sure it was like an IOCDF article. I clicked the link and holy moly, that's me. Holy crap, this is the thing that I've been grappling with for so long, since I was 7 years old. This is the thing. This is it. This is the unifying thing that keeps coming up. I can't wait to learn more about it. Let's go. And I, called Erica and I said, hey, appreciate you. I need to find a specialist. She said, love you. Good luck. Good for you. Okay, cool. Get in with an ERP therapist. I read more about exposure response prevention. I was able to mostly expose this theme away by myself. But what I think really happened was, with this new information, it solved the doubt. It resolved the doubt for me. This is it. This is the answer you've been looking for. You couldn't find it in the bubble because you didn't have access to this piece of information, right? Wow. what I want to come back to also is, why is this ego dystonic? Why am I experiencing this thought fusion as ego dystonic? Well, because if I truly, honest to God, wouldn't care if I was a lesbian, why is this ego dystonic? And here's the thing. It's ego dystonic because I would find out something about me that I thought was the truth is actually wrong, right? That there's this, and that's the feared self. There's this spectral, spooky version of me that is the total opposite of who I think I am. That's why it's ego dystonic to me. Additionally, the consequences that flow out of becoming that person were terrible. I would lose my partner, which would cause a rift in my social network because we have, we've been together 10 years. We have a lot of the same friends. I might lose our house. This is a house that we inherited together. This is my childhood home. So it's no surprise that after we moved in, this started to get very loud. Oh my God, right? I could possibly lose my house. And then I would also have to live as a person who experiences tremendous hate beyond misogyny. And ultimately, on top of losing my partner and all of these other horrible things, I may never find someone to share my life with. So my life and my identity would be upside down. So it's ego dystonic, not because I would care that I was a lesbian. It's ego dystonic because I would find out something about me that I thought was the truth is wrong. That I would wake up and I would do a 180. And that's the thing about the Pirot and the repugnant obsessions that is really nicely addressed by thought fusion. Here I'm confusing a possibility of a thought with having an actual thought, and it's ruining my life. So how do we apply this to our practice, right? What does this mean what does this mean? How do we take this to our clients and work it into our practice? A lot of this is psychoeducation, right? We're going to help clients understand that this is just more inferential confusion, and helping them understand the mechanism behind that is going to help them disengage from their thoughts, see them for what they are, and dismiss them, right? It's going to help them come out of the bubble and back into reality where you can trust that you know who you are, and your identity is not going to do a 180 overnight. Right. So again, it's slightly different from an external obsession where, that's just me versus the doorknob, baby. Right. And this is an internal state of affairs. And I think that's, maybe why this causes so much suffering, is that you're carrying with this with you wherever you go. Right. I can leave my lock checking at home. And am I still going to be worrying about it when I'm at work? Yeah, maybe. But this is something that's going to be, really troubling for me no matter where I go. Wherever I go, there I am. And there the OCD is too. So again, this is about an internal state of affairs. So if you're working with somebody who has taboo, repugnant, pedophilic, sexual orientation, or any doubts about maybe even any kind of their identity, like their gender identity, Thought Fusion is going to be a really important piece to send home and to help them understand so that they can resolve the inferential confusion between imagining having a thought and having a real thought, and what those two things mean. Wait a minute, hold on, where's your happy ending? I leaned into my values that day and we got married, right? I did it, y'all. I worked, I pushed through the doubt. Was I sick to my stomach? Absolutely. Was I telling myself stories about, oh my God, what if this, and then we're going to get a divorce and I'm going to live my life in isolation and blah, blah, blah. Of course, right? Of course, that narrative was still going. And frankly, it almost ruined the day, right? It really came very close. Because that day was, I really wanted it to be, I wanted it to be beautiful. I wanted it to be special, and I wanted it to be perfect, because who doesn't want their wedding to be perfect? And instead, I remember it as, here's a piece that OCD almost took from me and I didn't let it. Here's a time where I was able to push through that discomfort, not knowing I had OCD, put the doubt aside and lean into the things that I valued, even if OCD was screaming and telling me horrible consequences about what might happen at that time. So here we are, happy and in love. Sideways rain, it's 40 degrees. Don't have a spring wedding in Iceland, because in your head you think, oh yeah, May, it's going to be 50 degrees. No, it's not. It's going to be 35 degrees with sideways rain, and that strapless dress, girl, isn't going to do you any favors, right? So here we are, soaked to the skin with rain and sleet, and my makeup's washing off, and I'm heaving my dress, which is absolutely soggy and soaked with water. It's like 40 pounds, I swear to God. And am I struggling with OCD? Is OCD there? Yes, but I'm also glowing because I'm so happy to be spending my life with this wonderful person who's my best friend. So that's one of the beautiful things that happens when we don't let OCD win. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If you have any questions about Thought Fusion, application, implications, what it means for treatment, how we explain this to our clients. If you're inferentially confused, tell Fred, because I am also still a little bit confused.
Thank you, Katie. That was amazing. I really appreciate, especially when you were talking about the shame and guilt component, your vulnerability and sharing this with us. And there are lots of thanks coming in the chat. And there are a couple questions as well.
Can I make a brief comment before we go to the questions?
Yes.
Which is first, I thought it was an amazing presentation. And I have also a small prediction that I think this is going to be one of the most watched OCD presentations on the internet. I don't know whether you like that or not, Katie, but I think it will be, because I think it will be, it will be very helpful for many people with the same obsession, which is sexual irritation, which is like very prevalent, but also similar obsessions. And I think it will really resonate with, I can think of clients of my own in the present and in the past. I think it will resonate with many, and it also provides at the same time some sort of eye-opening, I think, or it provides an eye-opener in terms of seeing what is happening here. The reason why at the time I wrote this article was back in 2003, was I was really bothered by how the automatic assumption in the literature, and still is, that people with OCD have these thoughts with motivated intent, as if, yes, we're all a little bit homosexual, or we're all a little bit sometimes attracted to children, as if these thoughts are somehow real. And you see that also represented in books where you say, well, the evil inside of you, the perverse within us, whatever, all this terminology that is used. But I think with OCD, it's actually the opposite. It's the opposite. It's that they are so afraid of having these thoughts that they generate these thoughts, or they worry about the possibility of having these thoughts, which of course, through immersion into it, through inferential confusion, makes them live these thoughts as if they're real. But it starts out as a simple possibility. It's not something that's really inside of them whatsoever. There's no real attraction to children, it's the possibility that it may be attracted, or the possibility that it may have a sexual image of a child, which is then creates that image, obviously, which is then taken as evidence for being a pedophile, right? That's the mechanism of thought fusion. There's confusion, because we can imagine all kinds of thoughts. Just talking about child molestation can create imagery of molesting a child, right? Just as we do it, as I'm talking about it, I can see the image in my head. The problem, it doesn't create a problem, because I know that image is not, I'm imagining it. I'm looking at the possibility of it. I'm not confusing it as something that arises within me with motivated intent in terms of I want to harm a child, right? That's the confusion that's happening in OCD. That's what inspired me. And that also shows what a mistake it may be to lean into the uncertainty there, right? Why do you want people to lean into something that's not true? Now, there can be a lot of avoidance. Sure, you have to address that. I think it's important to address when there's a lot of avoidance, because then it almost becomes like a phobic avoidance of the thought, which can in itself perpetuate it. But that's something different than accepting the idea that you may be that person, that you actually may be a pedophile. That makes no sense, right? So there's a difference there. So anyways, that's the main point I wanted to make here. Great presentation, and I think it may actually provide some resolution to people with OCD, because once you do resolve this, it can be quite dramatic. You were helped by ERP, which is great too. You know, you say it sort of changed you, changed the doubt, but also I think the recognition of somebody saying to you for the first time, no, this is not real. This is something else. This is OCD. That cognitive message had a lot of impact on you, which is
Absolutely.
not for right, and that really helped you. It won't help everybody, especially, but in your case, it did, which was great. It sort of invalidated the whole doubt. For the first time, there was somebody, thank God for the therapist, that intuitively was able to recognize, no, this is not just a gender ambivalence. This is something else. This is ego dystonic. There's something else going on here. It's far more. It's obsessional doubt or whatever. She was able to recognize it was something different, which is great. So I understand this has actually led to your first diagnosis of OCD, that for the first time it was recognized.
Yes. Yep.
Right. Great. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, great presentation. So I just wanted, and thanks for allowing me to comment on that, Mary.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. There were some questions early in the chat. I know Jeremy had a couple questions and Paul. I'm wondering, Jeremy, do you still have that question, and are you willing to articulate it?
My question is just, Katie, I value so much how you've talked from lived experience, and I'm curious about, was that thought fusion concept when you got it like an immediate light bulb moment, like, oh, that's what that is? Or did you really have to slow down your obsessional doubt sequence and catch yourself doing that and like figure it out through analysis?
I had to meet with Fred yesterday to go, I think I got it, but I'm not quite there. Because one of my issues was that I kept confusing thought fusion with ironic process. So I kept thinking like, oh, thought fusion is when you accidentally create a thought by trying not to have the thought. And it wasn't until yesterday when Fred was like, whoa, slow down. Right. And I also, the night before had read and highlighted the paper, and I think I read it twice and took a bunch of notes on it. And I was like, oh my God, I have to relearn this. And I have to relearn how to apply this to myself before I can bring it to the presentation. So it really wasn't until yesterday when Fred was like, you're almost there. Let's kind of go back and kind of here's the definition of it, and now we can kind of reverse engineer the presentation based on something that would be clearer, which was really, really helpful.
Thanks.
To add to that, if you want to simplify it, and which Katie did, right? Thoughtthought fusion is the same thing as inferential confusion, confusing something imagined with something real, except that the imagined in this case is something inside of you, a thought, an urge, an impulse, an emotion, whatever it may be. It's not about the imagined of the door being unlocked, which is like an external thing. So it's inferential confusion, which is this confusion between imagination and reality. But in this case, what is imagined is something inside of you. So quite simple. Look at the practical examples in the article. It's like you may think about I could hurt someone, and you may have that image in your mind of hurting someone, an intrusive thought, if you will, if you want to call it that, by not recognizing that this thought comes about because you're immersing yourself into the possibility, you may confuse it with it being a thought with motivated intent. And that also relates to the OCD bubble, where these thoughts, the possibility, what is initially a doubt, can become a lived reality very quickly. Right, where the reality of that thought becomes so overwhelming that it's as if you really are that person. So if you have the idea I might be a homosexual, I could be homosexual, I could be this, whatever, then you may actually start feeling like that. You may start to feel what it's like to be attracted to the same sex. Not there's anything wrong with homosexuality, but it's not who you are if you have OCD, you know. So you may start to feel like what it's like, you know. You may also start to, as Katie mentioned in the presentation, you start to check, like, why am I looking? You cannot even look at somebody from the same sex anymore without thinking that it means something, that it therefore means that you are a homosexual, you know. Or watch a movie, you're afraid at the moment that people start kissing with the same sex, you know, and what your reaction would be to that. So there's a lot of anticipation as well, but you start to live that thing as a reality, even though it's just based in your imagination. You know? And there are all kinds of other elements and illusions that the OCD uses to keep this thing alive. Like, for example, why would I have this doubt if I'm not a homosexual to start with, right? That seems like an argument. Well, you have this doubt because you're afraid you could be, right? Or because you, to start with, but the OCD always turns it upside down, right? Where the evidence in quotes that it creates becomes evidence for its own reality. That's the loop that OCD almost always uses. So again, simplify the concept by realizing it's inferential confusion, but applied to an internal state.
Thanks.
I have a little bit to add to Jeremy, that I have that activity that I posted in Facebook where I tried to kind of demonstrate what it's like to go into our imagination with these thoughts and to have these thoughts in our imagination. And I have had a couple clients who have resolved their doubt, their inferential confusion through that that practice, because they are able to realize that it's the imagination at play. And in that realization, they're able to really kind of connect the irrelevancy of the OCD story, right? The stories that they have. So just like we do the foundational, exercises like the sequence and the logic that gets used and the story that's involved, that all kind of helps the client understand the process. And talking about or learning about Thoughtthought Fusion, I think, contributes to that and can really kind of more specifically, I think personally, as someone who does a lot of rumination and had the repugnant, like Puro, like relating to having Puro experience, I think that this Thoughtthought Fusion can really be helpful in validating that experience, but also creating more and more understanding of the process that's involved with those internal. I had the thought, but I didn't have the thought. I imagine having the thought.
What I'm wondering is if I should expect that people will hear this and be like, oh my God, that's so validating. Or if they're going to say, I don't think that's me. I think that it's an urge, but then slowing it down and doing the session one work will have them go, oh, okay, that was me. The same way when I check a door to see if it's locked, I only have to check it for an instant. Do I have to check my thoughts for an instant? I could see it, or did it take people with lived experience actually some work to be able to see it happening in there? And I'm hearing kind of runs a spectrum that, yeah, it can be a light bulb moment, but that actually like it takes some experiential learning for folks to get it a lot of times.
It can take a long time. Yeah, some it can be quick. I mean, traditionally, it's also the most difficult subtype to treat, right? Or at least always considered to be the most. It's also a subtype where ERP is considered to be less suitable by some. Now, whether that's all empirically proven, probably not. But from our clinical experience, I think it sort of fits that these are difficult cases, or that it's a difficult subgroup to treat, and sometimes it can take a long time. But then the nice part about it is that there's the potential for resolution, which other approaches don't have. Because if you actually have these thoughts, well, you cannot get past these thoughts other than accept them. If these are intrusive thoughts, if we all have thoughts about molesting children, and these are real thoughts, then, right? I mean, how you can get How can you get beyond them? You cannot.
The logic of that, though, is that there's the negative reinforcement of the that keeps going, that keeps the compulsion in place, and that I'm not getting learning experiences about my obsession if I keep doing the compulsion. So they say that there's a downstream effect where I change my appraisal because of the learning experiences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sure. If you do that, if you accept it, that is a solution. I don't know what the quality of life after that will be, but it is a solution to no longer obsess or to no longer have compulsions about it. But I think even in I-CBT, we recognize you have to get out of that bubble. You have to get out of this negative reinforcement. I mean, that's essential for any treatment. In ERP, it's called response prevention. In I-CBT, it's called not rehearsing the doubt. And in mindfulness, it's called fusion. You know? So, I mean, it's all, you want to get, these are all consequences of the doubt to start with. The compulsive elements, the mental compulsions, they all come after the doubt. Now, we want to take people out of this compulsion, back towards the doubt, in order, and the processes that create the doubt, in order to resolve the doubt so that the compulsions are no longer necessary. But yeah, you have to educate and psychoeducate the client that the compulsions only keep you in the doubt. It's a rehearsing of doubt, take you away further from the origin of the doubt to start with. So you lose, especially with these type of obsessions, people get even more confused the more they go into the bubble. You have to pull them back into that. Now, you don't do that by saying you just have to give these thoughts no more importance. You have to accept these thoughts because we all have them. They're okay to have. Don't worry about it. It's fine. That will work maybe if the person accepts that, but I think most people will have difficulty with that in the end. In I-CBT, the end message is, no, you don't even have the thoughts. So it's no problem to start with. Always comes down to that with inferential confusion. If it's generated from the imagination, these doubts, then there's no problem to start with. So nothing that comes after is necessary either. And you can just, well, actually the thought in itself will fall away once you realize that. It's not even about dismissing the thought or trying to dismiss the thought. It's the resolution is implied in its origin as coming from the imagination.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, Fred, because it's like it's not about like how to get out, but it's about, like, as you mentioned before, it's not about getting out of the bubble. Yeah, there's a piece of that later in the treatment when the person is consolidating, but I think that this is a strategy that helps the person recognize that this is a process that's happening. Right. This is I'm not having the thought, I'm imagining having the thought. And I think that can be a strategy for people to help resolve this inferential confusion, because in a way they really are kind of like understanding the process after that. Whereas it's like a framework for us to explain the process, and having that framework is nice, right? Like when a client comes to you and they're like, this is what I'm doing, you can actually see it more and more and more. Like when I'm working with someone now and they're like, when they're explaining it, I don't want this to happen to my partner, but it's like the thought kind of came, but it kind of didn't, right? Like when they're explaining that, you're like, this sounds like thought fusion. Let's talk about that. And then they're able to kind of understand it more. And it just really helps, I think, to maybe not for everyone, but maybe it will work for some of your clients. And so I do cover it if it does come up. I cover it with clients because it's possible, right? This might be the thing that helps them resolve that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you also have a very good intervention, I think, the flying metaphor, which you recently posted in the Facebook group. So I would recommend people have a look at that as well.
Yeah, that post is from May, but it gets recycled a little bit, and I still use it.
Okay.
It's a little bit older, but it's it is helpful. Like, I mean, it's a little bit of an activity for people to really kind of, it's not an exposure, right? It's not intended to be an exposure, but it really is kind of gives them like a clear understanding. Like, you find a thought that they're okay with having, right? Imagining having the thought, I want pizza. Okay, so then they imagine that. Okay, now imagine having the thought, right? And it gets us thinking about, this is what they're doing a lot of, and we're just giving a framework for them to understand what's going on.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I see a question that's interesting from Laurie. Is there a difference between I'm afraid I'm going to have the thought that I'm attracted to somebody of the same sex, or what if I'm attracted? No, I think ultimately the what if is a doubt. Ultimately, the what if is just a doubt. It's just phrased differently. But what is nice about the what if, it sort of shows how or it emphasizes the imaginative aspect of it, right? It's the person what if, so they move into a possibility of what could be, what might be. But that's the case. That's in both cases, no matter how you formulate it. I mean, I might be attracted to somebody of the same sex, or what if I'm attracted? To me, that's the same thing. Yeah.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah. And it can also go the other way around, right? I mean, it's a little bit of a, for example, a person who is homosexual and they have OCD, they could also be having obsessions of what if I'm heterosexual. You know, it's important. This is a difficult topic in terms of differentiating it from gender ambivalence, which is something different. Which is different, and it's important to correctly identify whether it's OCD or not. You know. Because the whole treatment is different, right? In that case, you know? So, but if you have this compulsive element, and you see this thought fusion clearly happening, as the therapist, who was not even an OCD specialist, intuitively was able to recognize, you know, then I think if you know OCD, you should be able to differentiate between real gender ambivalence, which is very prevalent too, you know, versus sexual orientation OCD, which is different.
Just to elaborate on that a second, Fred, like, because I think also there's two different potential things that we're talking about there, like the difference between gender identity and the ambivalence that someone could have about what gender they are, and the fluidity that can be natural and egosyntonic.
Oh yeah, of
and
course.
Then also sexual orientation, you know, who they're sexually or affectionately attracted to.
Yeah.
And then also each of those things, whether it's egosyntonic or ego-dystonic. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Yeah.
In my mind, we are what we are. So I could be bisexual. I could be a heterosexual. I could be a homosexual. Wherever I am in that spectrum, that's generally, and it can be ambivalent about it as well. You know, the problem is, like, once you start with a certain identity that you have and that you know yourself to be, and then start doubting it, then you're dealing with OCD. You know, but that can be across the entire spectrum. Even somebody who is bisexual, you know, they can have obsessions about their sexual identity if that's who they are. You know.
Yes.
Right. So you start with who the person really is. You know. Now, if there's ambivalence, then it can become a little bit more complicated. But then you have to see, okay, are we dealing with OCD here or not? You know. And I can imagine that sometimes can be difficult, especially if the ambivalence is very ruminative. Can be difficult to differentiate from OCD, but from my viewpoint, it's about a doubt of who we are, and there is a certain level of clarity and certainty in our identity. I don't think, and anybody else who has has experienced these type of obsessions, I don't think we have to go to the point where we have to say, well, you just have to accept that you're not sure, you know. Right. I don't think that works. I don't think we live our life that way either, you know, where we are, we have to sort of accept that we could be anywhere on the spectrum, when it's not really the case. It's okay to be anywhere on the spectrum, but when it's not, why accept something that you are not, right? Yeah.
I know there's about 5 minutes left, and I know there are some questions in the chat that might be unanswered, and I'm going to ask, if you still have a question, will you go ahead and speak up, and we'll see if we can get them covered quickly, or we can continue also the discussion on Facebook after this is done this afternoon. I'll go with a quick one, Katie, like, I know you've openly talked about your fear of your dog dying. So is there the potential for thought fusion in that example as well? Like if you're afraid of having the thought about your dog dying, then would that be an example of the thought fusion, where if you look at your dog, you have the fear like, oh no, I don't want to have the thought that my dog is dying. And is that another example?
You know, I think that's where for me kind of that ironic process came in, where it was every
Okay.
time I looked at him, because I was afraid to have the thought, I would brace against having the thought. So before I even had it, I would go, oh, I really don't want to have the thought. And there it would be. And so it was this very well rehearsed response for me to look at him and have an intrusive thought, and look at him and have an intrusive thought. And it was like, there it is.
I think
Right.
that's a confusion I have then, that I still need to learn the
Um,
difference between the ironic process that you're discussing.
well, if I could, it can get complicated, but thought fusion can also develop as a secondary problem, often on top of an obsession. So where the person starts worrying about, what if I have the obsession again? Oh my God, I had the obsession again. That's a little bit what Katie is describing with the dog, right? So that is thought fusion. This layering, this metacognitive layering, some people with OCD are very vulnerable to that. Really hard to bring them back to reality, because they layer one obsession on top of another obsession, which is in its essence all the time, which is a process of thought fusion happening there. Now, the initial obsession about what if my dog will die, my dog might die, that is not necessarily thought fusion. That's more like, that can be thought event fusion. If I think about my dog dying, then maybe he will die. It's like a magical type of thinking that is thought event fusion. You know, with the dog or a dog, we're dealing with something in the external world. With thought fusion, which is inferential confusion as well, but more generally, with thought fusion, we're dealing with inferential confusion, a confusion between reality and possibility that revolves around an inner state of affairs. So it's about something that might be inside of me, a worry that something might be inside of me, thinking about a possibility and then confusing it with thinking about it, that is actually there inside of me. Because look, we can imagine all kinds of things. We can imagine ourselves being different people than we really are, right? We have to differentiate those type of thoughts from who we really are. That the confusion with OCD is that the two starts to merge. That's why the fusion occurs. So confusion, fusion is a metaphor. Confusion is not. So that's why I would prefer the term confusion. But at the time we thought, okay, it sort of fits within this idea of all these different type of fusions to start with. So we can call it thought fusion in this case as well. But it's really just inferential confusion. You know, confusion between reality and imagination, but applied to something that you imagine to be inside of you, which is not really there.
Well, thank you so much, Katie and Fred, for your comments. I'm going to stop the recording and then just hang out for a couple minutes.